And welcome everybody to yet another edition of Lights Out with Johnny Roberts. Coming up on this edition of the program, we're going to have David Regan. He's going to tell us what he's doing to help Fords right now. And also Ryan Mcgee from Marty and Mcgee on ESPN is going to talk with us about what he had to do way back in the early days of NASCAR on Fox. But one of the things that NASCAR announced recently is the fact that they're going to start paying drivers to promote the sport. This goes absolutely against anything that NASCAR was built on or NASCAR stands for. I don't think it fits in with the Dale Earnhardt with the T-shirt underneath the race car trying to do anything he can to win and promote the sport. What if you were a pizza maker, right? What if you worked for a pizza company and you fed your children off that? Do you think the average human is going to want to get paid to go out and promote the product that feeds their children? I don't think so. So for NASCAR drivers who make tens of millions of dollars off the sport, it just doesn't go with the premise of NASCAR racing to pay them to promote the sport. Now, I thought bringing this up might make some race car drivers mad, right? I don't ever want to take away money from somebody that they may potentially make. But again, this does not fit into the theme of NASCAR. What fans like about NASCAR is, as our good friend Ken Squire once put it, the common man doing uncommon things. The common man goes out and promotes their own stuff without getting paid for it. Again, these drivers make tens of millions of dollars. I think it should be within their wheelhouse to promote it without getting paid for it. So here's probably the worst thing about the whole idea, right? Say tomorrow Kyle Busch gets on the air and says, hey man, this race car is the best thing I have ever driven. Are you going to believe it, or are you going to think, hey, Kyle's just saying that because he's getting paid for it? I don't know if NASCAR has ever been non-transparent. They have always been upfront about drivers saying what's on their mind and fans saying what's on their minds as well. So I, again, do not think that paying a driver to go out and promote the sport that we all love fits into the common theme of NASCAR, and that, once again, to quote Mr. Squire, is the common man doing uncommon things. All right, it's time to go lights out with former driver David Regan. Now, I say former driver, but David, you're still doing a lot these days to help Ford. What's your involvement with these race teams these days, and what do you do to help?
Yeah, thanks, John, for having me on. And it's really been a great transition. I didn't really want to stop being involved in the sport. I was tired of the grueling schedule and really the commitment, the stress level that comes with competing, 38 times a year and having to work through, being a full-time Cup Series driver. So the opportunity came around with Ford Performance to be their test driver. We've got a test team that all the Ford teams share information. All the manufacturers in the Cup Series have a similar program that we go to a lot of the Goodyear tire tests. If there's a new track repave or something like that, our group will go and we'll collect data. We'll run for a couple of days, and then we go back to our Ford Performance engineering office here in Concord, North Carolina. And we go through a lot of the same runs that we made at the racetrack on our simulator to help perfect those tools that all the Ford guys use every week. Team Penske and Stewart Haas Racing, RFK, Wood Brothers, Front Row, all those guys are in the simulator on a weekly basis developing setups and strategies. So, I'm part of that group that helps develop those tools and hopefully gives them something that's accurate that they can learn from. And it's been a great transition because I still feel like I'm part of the team, but I get to be home a little bit more with my wife and kids.
Well, David, that's got to be a huge compliment, though, isn't it, that they would want you to do that when the great Ford drivers that are still out there right now, you have an opportunity to help them. That's got to be a huge compliment to you that they came to you and asked you to do that.
I'm really honored that they have the confidence that I can give, good feedback when I'm at the racetrack, still compete at a high level. And it's been great the last couple of years. I've still been able to run a couple of races here and there. I've run the last few Daytona 500s. a couple of years ago for Rick Ware Racing. I was able to run a couple of other racetracks. So, being in the seat certainly helps. But, I was just coming off of full time racing. And so I was pretty current with, this next gen car and the development that it came. And it was really a perfect time. I was looking to do something a little different, and the next gen car was rolling out, and we were going to step up our efforts with the testing and simulation programs. Like all the manufacturers have really spent a lot of time and money in that department. So, like I said, I'm honored that they feel confident enough that I can give the feedback and talk to the drivers and the crew chiefs and the engineers and kind of answer questions and talk about some of the things that I've been able to feel. We were just at Martinsville last week making some laps. They've got a new tire that the Cup teams will be using there for the last race before the championship four. So we collected a lot of good data. We ran a lot of laps, and hopefully that'll help the four teams when they go back.
So, David, had a great chat with a fellow Ford guy, Greg Biffle, years ago when he had left racing. And there was a lot of people at the same time that had left and left, really what you could consider to be in the prime of their career. And I don't think fans quite understand, they just say, why would this guy retire from something that you get paid a ton of money for? There's a ton of excitement. But I don't think fans quite understand what being a Cup driver full-time entails. In terms of what's on your mind, the way Greg put it, and I love quoting this, is that he said, you think about nothing but how to make that race car faster when you're at a stoplight in your personal car. But it's a lot more than just showing up and racing on a Sunday.
Yeah, you're right, and Greg is right. As a driver, when you wake up in the morning, you think about your race team, your race car, responsibilities that you have as a driver because you're representing hundreds of employees for your race team, your manufacturer. The sponsors put millions of dollars on your performance and for you to, push their product, spend time with their customers, their employees, and the fans. You've got a lot of fans that love to see you run well and love to cheer for you. And so I feel like you do have that weight on your shoulders all the time. And we've got a very short off season, but even during the off season, you're planning for the next season. And I tell people a lot in motorsports that you really learn to deal with defeat a lot because you just don't win a lot of races. Even when you're Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon and some of the greats, you win 5 or 6 races a year, and that's a lot of races. But you lose a lot more races than you win, and so it is grueling. It's tough, and Greg was an awesome teammate for me, a mentor. I wished I would have asked him more questions when he and I were teammates for a few years at Roush. But yeah, he stopped, and I know that he can still go drive a race car. I bet he could hop in a car today and go and compete at a high level. But it is a young man's sport, and I gave the sport of NASCAR everything. And really, I tell my kids this and even other people that, for the last 15 or 16 years of my life, racing was first. It was before my family. It was before my friends. It was before my faith, my community. It didn't matter. Racing was always number one, and that does get a little harder as you get married. You have kids. You have some other things going on in your life as you get a little older, and every time you say yes to that racing career, you're saying no to something else. And so again, I was at a point where I'd had a lot of fun. I was so grateful for the opportunities that I've had. But I was starting to say no to a lot of stuff that my kids were involved with. My parents were getting a little older. I didn't go to any of my friends' weddings, and they're having kids and doing stuff. And so yeah, it was a great transition. But I wouldn't change anything about the last 15 or 16 years. But it's a young man's game, and we'll let those teenagers and 20 something year old guys have at it.
David, you were a competitor and a winner for years. You saw a few different eras kind of come and go with race cars and the level of fan support. I think there's a lot of real positive stuff going on right now in the world of NASCAR. There's some things, of course, with any sport, you're going to get some negative news here and there. What's your overall feeling right now as a former full-time competitor when you look at the state of the sport and how it seems to be reviving? There seems to be more butts in seats. There seems to be more excitement right now surrounding the sport.
Yeah, Johnny, you and I saw each other a few weeks ago at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and that's my hometown track. And, projects like that have revitalized certain racetracks and certain markets, it was great to see how many fans were at Atlanta Motor Speedway. It was great to see the Bristol night race with a packed house. I went up to the truck race on I think it was the Thursday night, and it was packed for the rest of the weekend. And so I think the sport of NASCAR is in a great position. I think they do have strong leadership, that they've got great media partners with Fox and NBC, and some new guys coming on board next year with TNT and Amazon Prime. I think that the next gen car has been a good transition. We've got a record number of drivers winning races the last couple of years, 16, 17, 18 different drivers that are winning races. I think that's outstanding for the sport. I think the manufacturers are pretty excited the way the race cars look. Competition, I think, is at an all-time high. I mean, we're getting ready to head to Phoenix to crown the champion soon, and you've got some of the best of the sport has to offer. Racing for those final few spots. And I think there's great storylines, and you still have some old veterans that I say they're old. They're my age, but guys
Yeah.
like Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, that are still grinding it out. That a lot of the older fans can relate to. But then the young guys that are coming in that are making their mark, and I think we're starting to see that transition with guys like William Byron and Christopher Bell. Chris Buescher's been really good the last couple of years, and so I think the sport's in a great position. Yeah, I've rode the wave up in the early 2000s. I saw the struggles, in the mid 2000s, but I think the people at NASCAR, I think Marcus Smith and the people at Speedway Motorsports have continued to reinvest in properties, and the race teams are being real creative on what they're doing and the access that race fans have. Yeah, I think the sport's in a great place. And I tell you what, I mean, when I'm not driving, I'm watching the race just like our fans are on a Sunday afternoon, and I love it. Those final 50 to 75 laps at most all of these racetracks are still really exciting.
So, David, do you have plans to jump behind the wheel anytime soon?
Nothing else the rest of this year. Well, not competition, but I will be out in Phoenix with the NASCAR battery electric vehicle, the prototype that
Oh, cool.
NASCAR and some of the OEMs put together this EV car last year, and I was able to do a little bit of the testing in that car. We unveiled it at the Chicagoland Street Course and at the Chicago Street Race, and that was a fun project to be a part of. So we will have it out at Phoenix for the championship weekend, doing some demonstration laps. It'll be on display out there for all of our fans on the West Coast to see. But no more races this year. You might see me hop in a Legends car or maybe a late model car
Awesome.
here in the Southeast from time to time. But I get a lot of laps on the side by side and the four wheeler here at my house. Checking on the animals and trying to help my 8-year-old and my 10-year-old girls, trying to teach them the gas pedal and the brake pedal. So we have some fun on that. But yeah, I would love to run a race or two next year. I really love the truck series. I'm a big fan of the truck series. So if I can find me an F-150 to drive for one of the truck races next year, that would be fun. But if I never run another cup race, that's fine too. But the Daytona 500 is always a special one. So I'm sure I'll make a few phone calls this off season to see if I can put something together.
Well, David, you're living proof of two things. First of all, nice guys can finish first. You won some of these races, but also that when you leave full-time driving, you can still be involved with the sport. It's great to talk to you, man. So great to catch up. Miss seeing you every weekend, but hope to see you very soon.
Well, thank you for having me on. I'll be glad to hang out anytime, and thank you for what you do. I always enjoy listening to you on Sirius XM radio and watching all the stuff online. And good to see you and catch up at the racetrack a few weeks ago.
All right. Thanks, David. Time to go lights out with ESPN's Ryan Mcgee of Marty and Mcgee. And Ryan, so much to talk to you about. It is so great to see you. I don't know if people really know how far back we go together, but before we get into past history, let's talk about something recent that's really cool. You recently got the University of Tennessee's Alumni Service Award. It's one thing we all go out year after year to try to do good things for people. Man, when you get an award like that, that must have been overwhelming, humbling, and just a wonderful honor.
Yeah, and I was completely flabbergasted. They kept that thing a secret, and to the point that they didn't tell Marty Smith that I was going to get it in the middle of the show until like midnight Friday night, because they were afraid he would accidentally tell me. But it was great, and of course all my roommates and all my buddies from college are giving me grief because we did the Marty Mcgee set was on the hill, the kind of the academic quad at Tennessee, and the building we were right next to, I almost flunked math, and those guys were like, "Did they know you almost flunked math?" Like literally 50 yards from where you're sitting right now. So yeah, it was an honor, and listen, it just was an honor, and everyone loves our alma mater, and it's always great to get back. But when they love you back, it's really special. I did not know that. I cried on TV, JR. I wasn't, that's how unexpected it was.
I can understand that. So, Ryan, I know a lot of people right now know you as the on-air guy with ESPN and the show that is amazingly successful. Great show. But I don't know if people really know the history that you and I have going back to 2001 doing Totally NASCAR together. We had just a really great time back then. It was one of those situations where, yeah, we were doing a TV show, but everybody was all in. It wasn't about any individual. It was just everybody out there for the betterment of the show.
Yeah, and it was scary. I mean, I was really fortunate to start with ESPN right out of college as a production assistant. Moved to Connecticut and did the whole deal. And I was with ESPN for almost 7 years. Worked on RPM Tonight, which was the original nightly motorsports show back in the day. And then when the NASCAR contract changed hands and it went from ESPN to Fox and NBC, Patty Wheeler was working with Fox, and legendary producer, and she called and I said yes. And it was scary, man. But what helped was jumping off that diving board, but then doing it with someone that I had known, a little bit from the racetrack, which was you and Steve Burns, who had been a great friend, but I had never actually worked with Steve. And the fact that we were kind of, and a lot of my friends behind the scenes, when I was a producer, and these are my friends that I had known from the racetrack after, 6 years of being on the road, going to 25 races a year. And so, yeah, you're right, man. It's funny because it's been almost 2.5 decades. And
yeah,
I feel like we're friends. I was literally up at the new NASCAR productions offices this morning, working on helping them with some things for the NASCAR Hall of Fame induction in February, and hit the door, and there were 3 people right there, like from back in the day, from the old NASCAR Images office, in East, or I guess in West Charlotte. And so, yeah, you're right, man. It was so much fun because it was refreshing, because it was working with your friends, some you knew, some who became friends. But you're right. There weren't a lot of egos to worry about. Everybody kind of we were all pulling the rope in the same direction. And at the time, I don't want to say you take it for granted, but you just hope that's how it's always going to be. And as you know, man, it's not. And so we were lucky because for several years we were all rowing the boat and had our oars going in the same direction.
So I was probably never more happy to see you, though, Ryan. It was one of the more difficult nights of all of our lives, I think. February 2001, when we lost Dale Earnhardt. We were doing a program called NASCAR Victory Lane, and we were kind of the weekend crew, and you guys were the weekday crew, and we had this huge job in front of us. And all of a sudden, here comes Ryan Mcgee busting through the door with a big old box of tapes and a ton of knowledge. And that was, again, one of those nights when everybody pitched in, and I'll just never forget that night.
Yeah, and Totally NASCAR, at that point, we had done 5 shows. We did Monday through Friday the week before, and I was producing the show remotely from Charlotte. But they had built a new TV studio over Victory Lane just a couple years earlier. We'd actually used it at ESPN, And I remember, so Steve Burns was interviewing Dale Earnhardt. Everybody remembers the famous interview that Darrell Waltrip did with Dale that Friday, where he's like, I got it all, DW, I got it all. Well, right after he did that interview, he came upstairs and recorded a segment for Totally NASCAR. And we did that on Friday. And I remember he sat down and he's looking around and he said, is McGee here? I was like, no, he's back in Charlotte. And he pointed at the camera and he goes, congratulations on the new job. Don't screw it up. And that was the last thing you said directly to me, right? And so we did the show that Friday, and then of course we lost him on Sunday. But you're right. It was the first Daytona 500 I had missed in a long time. I've been at Speed Weeks the weekend before. It was the first Daytona 500 I've missed since like '95, and it was weird sitting at home watching it. But the race ends, and I'm like, I don't feel great about this. And then my phone rang. And it was Patty Wheeler, and Patty Wheeler was with David Hill, who had just talked to Mike Helton, and I knew before a lot of the world did that Dale was gone, and so she's like, "Get to the office now." And so you're right. I jumped in the truck and hauled freight over to the old INSP Mediacom production facility over off of South Boulevard in South Charlotte. And you're right. I mean, I remember Pat Berger and Harry Cogan were producing that show. And I hit the door and I was like, I'm doing the obit. And so, wrote and produced the obituary that night. And to give you a little inside baseball, so I had left ESPN. They weren't super happy with me. My bosses weren't, that I left. And I'll never forget 11 o'clock that night. We did NASCAR Victory Lane. And then 11 o'clock that night, the National Sports Report with like Chris Myers and Keith Olbermann and those guys. And it came on at 11 o'clock Eastern, and so did SportsCenter. And SportsCenter for the Dale Earnhardt obituary ran a feature I had done about Dale Earnhardt a couple years earlier. And those things ran simultaneously. And it was very obvious the same person had written and produced those two pieces.
Yeah.
And my ESPN bosses were not super happy about that. But they were two completely different features. But obviously the tone was the same. Just like when you're writing, your fingerprints are kind of on it. But what a night, man. I remember specifically coming into the control room and everyone was crying.
Yep.
Because it just was the worst. And I didn't cry till I got home. That night I got home at like midnight, 12:30, and just cried because you check your emotions to do the job. And then you realize that Superman's gone. And then the next morning went right back to work. Now we've got to cover the aftermath, the funeral is coming, they're going to go to Rockingham and race, so what do you still do the job? And I just, what a way to start, right? People forget now, that's how Fox started in NASCAR. What was that week? And it's crazy to think about.
Yeah, and one of the things, Ryan, I don't know if I ever got a chance to tell you this, but it was one of the biggest honors you really possibly could get. We had to check our emotions, all of us, because Dale was just so much larger than life. Like you said, he's Superman, but he was a good friend, and we had lost him. But it was Derek Cope and myself that were doing that show that you guys all put together, and Teresa had called Derek the next afternoon, amid all that was going on with her, and told Derek that she wanted him to convey to everyone how high class she thought Victory Lane was.
I'd never heard that story. That's amazing. I had no idea. It's funny, man, because and then you think of it, this is 2001, right? And so we started the year with that, and we spent the entire spring and summer dealing with the aftermath of Dale Earnhardt's death, and then Dale Jr. wins in July, and then we had 9/11.
Yep.
And that year was just, I think about it now, and it's I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, but man, I don't know if I could do it again. I really don't. And it was but I'd never heard that story, man. I appreciate you sharing that, because it was
I'm glad I got an
opportunity.
Because it's a big honor.
That's a foxhole night, right? All of us that worked on those shows, then that's a bond that we're always going to have.
Yep, no question about that. So, Ryan, tell me a little bit about how did Marty and McGee come about? When did they come to you guys about doing that program?
Well, we wore them down. No. So what? what happened was, and I had known Marty, around this same time, 2000, 2001, I had met Marty probably in 2000. He and I don't remember the first time we met, but we know it was sometime around that time, probably at Martinsville, South Boston, something like that. But you talking about Totally NASCAR, the third season of Totally NASCAR, which would have been 2003.
Yeah.
We hired Marty. Tommy Serball was producer of the show and came to me and said, we need an insider. We need an analyst. And Marty was young and cool and ESPN.com or excuse me, NASCAR.com. And we brought Marty on as an analyst, as like an insider, like a Adam Schefter kind of guy. And so, I always tell everybody, if you want to be mad at anybody that put Marty on TV, blame me, because ultimately I greenlit it. And he and I became friends from there. But when ESPN got back into the NASCAR business, I think in 2007, they and it was a smart move. They hired Marty as their ESPN senior reporter or NASCAR senior reporter. And I had been writing for ESPN the magazine. Even when I was producing shows for Fox, I've been still freelancing writing for ESPN the magazine. And eventually they brought me back around that same time because ESPN was getting way back into the motorsports business. And so he and I were friends. We worked together on NASCAR Now, which was the nightly NASCAR show on ESPN. And we were driving to Martinsville. And this was a little over 10 years ago. And we were going to Martinsville to cover the race for ESPN TV. I picked up Marty at his house at 6 o'clock in the morning. We drove up to Martinsville from his house up in North Charlotte, Lake Norman. And we laughed. JR, we laughed from the time we left his house until we pulled into the media parking lot at Martinsville. And then that night, we laughed the whole way home. And we both were like, I think people would dig this. Like just us telling stories about back in the day and just whatever, just us being us. And so we went to the ESPN podcast people and were like, let us try. And so we did a podcast that no one listened to for about a year. And literally no one listened to it. That's why we always refer to the 406, because we only had 406 listeners. And so ESPN Radio, someone at ESPN Radio went, we want to put you guys on for a couple hours. And it was Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock on ESPN Radio. I mean, a dead time, time period. But they liked it. And eventually they moved us to Saturday morning. And then when SEC Network was getting rolling, somebody, Pete Waters, who had worked on RPM Tonight back in the day with me, Pete Waters was like, we should just put this on TV and see what happens. And, eventually they took us on the road 4 years ago in the fall. And JR, don't tell anybody, but they send us checks. Like we get paid money. And after every show, Marty looks at me after every show, Marty looks at me and he goes, you think we're going to get to do it again next week? I go, we'll see. And thankfully our bosses have let us kind of be us.
Which is fantastic. Hey, Ryan, it's, there's a lot of people in your lives that you come across. I got to say, I'm just so much better professionally and personally for having known you and having the opportunity to work with you. It really was a relatively short time that we did get to work together. But, man, cherish every moment of it, man. It is just so great to talk to you and share some of these memories.
We're family, man. I mean, that's just how I feel. I mean, it's just like these folks I saw today at NASCAR Productions. A lot of them I hadn't seen in a decade. And it doesn't matter. Family's family. Sometimes you go years without seeing your favorite cousin or your favorite uncle or aunt or whatever, but your family, man. And I was only half joking about Foxhole. We kind of went through it together. And, we didn't have any money. We had a lot of used tapes and secondhand gear. And we were literally doing our show out of a double wide trailer that was behind a building owned by a televangelist, right? And I'm not making any of this up. And
it's all true.
To have done all of that, we're still. That's why we're friends now, and it means the world to me to hear you say things like that.
Well, Ryan, thanks, brother. We got to do this again sometime.
You call me anytime, bud.
You got a deal, man. Thanks, Ryan. And let us now close this edition of Lights Out with Johnny Roberts with another quote from Ward Burton and perhaps the best ever post-race analysis of a race team's effort when Ward said, "Car ain't worth a damn, crew ain't worth a damn, driver ain't worth a damn." That summed up that day, but there are much better days ahead of them as well. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Tune in next time for another edition of Lights Out.